Primary election day, runoff, I should say. The runoff for the primaries is happening today across the great state of Mississippi, and we welcome to the program Mississippi's Secretary of State, Michael Watson. Mr. Secretary, give us an update on the runoffs today.
Yeah, so we are quiet around the office. Not a ton of calls coming in, and hearing a little report here and there from low turnout. We've got about 65 counties that have runoffs today, so we hope that Mississippians will really kind of wake up and understand how important these are. A lot of local runoffs, and as you know well, we've talked about this before.
Yeah,
those individuals at the local level will impact your life much more quickly than someone at the federal level. So really important elections today.
Absolutely. All right, so explain what one must do to qualify to vote in a runoff.
So that's a great question. We actually had an issue in Hinds County today where, as we understand it, there are a couple of precincts where folks were marked incorrectly. And for that, I'll say, just for an example, let's say that they voted in the Republican primary on the front end.
Yeah.
Now they have come back out to vote in the Democratic runoff. And they're being told you cannot vote in Democratic runoff if you voted in the Republican primary to start with. And that is correct. However, if they marked them incorrectly, and they should be allowed to vote in the Democratic primary because they voted as a Democrat in the original primary, then that's how it's supposed to work. So if you voted in the Democratic primary, you can vote in the runoff. If you voted in the Republican primary, you can vote in the Republican runoff. If you didn't vote at all, you can vote in either of the runoffs. So that's kind of just a quick breakdown of how that works.
Yeah, and that is controlled, is determined at the precinct, right? It's the poll workers that have that information available to them and make that determination.
That's correct. And if it was marked incorrectly, then there's going to be some issues, and that's kind of what we've heard a little bit out of Hinds County. So they are working on that currently to make sure that that is corrected.
Okay. All right. So you had an issue with that, you're saying, in Hinds County today, but no other reports of that sort of just crossover problem in any other of the races?
That's the only one we've heard so far, okay. And hopefully that stays that way.
Okay. Yeah, and that's I think it's important to always highlight that because I'm not sure that is a widely understood aspect of our election rules and process in Mississippi. But the big thing is if you voted on August 8th in the Republican primary, you can only vote in a Republican runoff, and vice versa. If you voted in Democrat, you can only vote the Democrat. If you didn't vote at all on August 8th, you can vote neither.
That's right. And I think, Gerard, if I remember correctly, I saw an article out there that the AP had put out that had some incorrect information. So I appreciate you touching on that this morning to make sure that folks are aware that they can follow those rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So what if you show up today, Mr. Secretary, and you have registered to vote and it's not found at the poll where you were supposed to vote? They don't find you in the system. What happens then?
Well, you'll always be allowed to vote by an affidavit ballot. Some folks call those provisional ballots, but just to make sure that people understand, you can always cast an affidavit ballot. And then if there's an issue somehow that the person did correctly register and they were timely at the conclusion of the election today, the resolution board will go through all of those affidavit ballots and decide which ones should be counted and which ones should not. So that's kind of the quick overview of the process and how it's supposed to work.
Gotcha. So you said at the top of the conversation we have runoffs occurring in 65 counties. Is that correct?
That's right. With probably, I think we have about 6 legislative races included in there, and some of those will be multi-county, but 65 counties have some type of election today. So the vast majority, clearly, of the state should be out there and voting in the polls. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the point I was going to make. With only 6 legislative races that advance to runoffs, and no statewides, right, that I'm aware of in either of the parties went to runoff status. So that means that in these 65 counties, the vast majority of these runoff elections are local races.
Absolutely. And again, just to emphasize that point, those are the ones that impact your life much more quickly than even the statewide level, but definitely the federal level. So folks need to be paying attention to who's going to be guiding their county and, effectively the state as well at the local level.
Same hours, right? 7 a.m., 7 p.m., got to show a photo ID.
That's exactly right. We've got 10 forms of ID folks can show. And just to remind them, if they are in line by 7 p.m., they will be allowed to vote. So typically what happens, and I think we talked about this before, the bailiff, if there is a line, the bailiff will come out and mark the end of the line by the person that's in there by 7 p.m. to make sure that they are allowed to vote.
Yeah, okay, got it. So wanted to pivot a bit and talk about who was at least set to be your opponent in the general election, Mr. Shawaski Young, Democrat, candidate for Secretary of State, abruptly announced that he was pulling out of the race, indicated that it's due to health reasons. And so I'll have to tell you, Mr. Secretary, I wasn't aware that we had this board, elections board, I believe is what it's called, that is a tribunal structure, is that right, that consists of the governor, the attorney general, and the secretary of state?
That's exactly right, the State Board of Election Commissioners. So basically, the general function that folks would probably need to be aware of is once the primaries take place and then it moves on to the general, we all meet and make sure that the general folks are going to be on the ballot that are in multi-district or statewide level will have met the qualifications and should, in fact, be placed on the ballot. So that's kind of the bigger function of the group. But in this instance, you're right. If an individual, in this instance, our friend Shawaski Young, and God, praying that God would bless him and make him whole. So encourage the rest of the state to do that as well. But in this case, if he does withdraw, and it's for health reason, he sends in his affidavit, and it has to have, the doctor has to sign off on this. It can't be just the candidate. Then the State Board of Election Commissioners has 5 days to accept or reject, and then the party executive committee has to send in a replacement for that candidate if the affidavit is accepted, and then And the interesting thing here, Gerard, is that the statute isn't clear on the timeline by when they need to send that name in. So that may get interesting as you look at 45 days out for absentee voting. Clearly, the ballot has to be printed before then. So it's going to be a little bit of a time crunch. So we'll see what happens with that one. So,
Mr. Secretary, what would cause the board to reject an affidavit, in this case, one that says that the candidate is experiencing health problems and is accompanied by doctor's information that attests to that? What would be the reason, if that should occur, that the board would reject that?
I'm not real sure on the historical context there, if that's happened before. This is an interesting case, and just to be clear to all of our listeners here, I have removed myself from that process since I am on the ballot myself. So my office has been handling all that information, but about a week and a half ago, the SBEC was supposed to meet last Monday. So the week prior to that, we had sent information out, the office did, to actually encourage him to bring some proof of residency, because there's proof out there that he has voted in California in 2018 and 2020. So the question is going to be, let's make sure that this health issue is affidavit is documented by a doctor, and I don't know why the commission wouldn't accept that, but that's I'm going to recuse myself, so they're going to have to make that decision themselves.
So is the act of accepting it necessary then for the party to have the power to name someone else?
So if they do not accept it within 5 days, accept or reject, basically the SBC has 5 days to do one or the other. And if nothing is done, then that becomes a question: can the State Democratic Party even replace him? So
I see.
Again, statute's not super clear on that issue. So just as it's not clear on the timeline they have to send a name. So that's going to get a little interesting.
Yeah, it is. And, of course, there are some questions about Mr. Young's residency, whether or not he meets that requirement. I believe 5 years of residency prior to running for statewide office. In this case, our Constitution enumerates that, and certainly for Secretary of State. So that's a question. But if his official statement is that he's experiencing health problems, and like you, we certainly hope that those get resolved.
That's right.
Yeah, we don't want anybody to, and you certainly, the stress and pressure of being a candidate for political office could exacerbate that problem that he's indicated is hypertension. We don't want that to be the case. Want him to get well. So, But we always appreciate you coming on the program and giving us some insight on Election Day, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks a lot, Mr. Secretary.
Happy to do so. Get out there and vote, Mississippi.
We're coming right back with more, folks, in the Element Wealth studio.